Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think that everyone is entering this wonderful event, and I have the honor and privilege of welcoming us, and I will be your MC for the afternoon. My name is Melissa Beck, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sozosei Foundation. I come to this work with an open heart and great pride in what the Correctional Association of New York has been able to accomplish for all of these years. I know probably everyone on this call has had their fair share of staring at their own reflections through Zoom over the past several weeks. And so I want to give everyone a special thanks for doing so again this afternoon. One note of housekeeping for everybody. You'll see probably on the right side of your screen a chat function. And if you don't have it up, you can do so by going to the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little talking box. It says chat underneath it. We're going to ask you there to use the chat function to share your thoughts and comments with our many honorees, and we'll be translating that into a virtual and permanent card. We want to create that lasting document so that the work of many honorees is always remembered, because we come here today really with two very important and very positive goals. The first is to reflect upon the critically important work of the Correctional Association and to learn about its big plans for the future, more important than ever in the context of what is happening, current events. And second, of course, to celebrate the service and legacy of the 24 board members who are stepping down from the organization, some after 3 decades of service. So it is now my absolute honor to introduce the Correctional Association's talented and dedicated executive director, Jennifer. Jennifer, are you ready to come on?
I am ready. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for honoring us by anchoring this event today and lending us your time and energy. Also, special thanks to Evan Davis, our honorary chair, to Ken Miller and Bill Snipes, who are event co-chairs today, our featured guests, who we'll hear from shortly, and last but by no means least, our staff and interns whose work and commitment makes this organization so exceptional. As most of you gathering with us today already know, the Correctional Association has been working on the issue of prison reform for 175 years. I've dedicated my career to this issue, and I know many of you have too. So it's an eerie experience to hear policymakers talking now about changes to the system that felt out of reach 10 or 20 years ago. Just yesterday, the New York State Legislature passed a bill that would repeal Civil Rights Law 50A, which is a powerful tool that has protected police officers and correctional officers from public disclosure of their personnel records. In moments like this, it feels like we're getting closer to real change, and it reminds us of how much work there is to do to make it happen. During the past few months, 2 converging crises have galvanized us in our work at the Correctional Association. First, the pandemic exposed prisons and jails as petri dishes for the spread of the coronavirus. In our recent report on COVID-19 in prisons, we found that at Otisville Correctional Facility, for example, the infection rate was 4 times higher than the statewide infection rate. Family members who responded to our survey wrote with urgency and desperation about their fears for their loved ones in prisons. The second crisis, which of course is not a new crisis, is the social upheaval stemming from yet another killing of a Black man by police and the resulting demands for accountability. The Correctional Association has long documented brutality and violence against incarcerated people by corrections officers. We see the violence on the street as connected to the same racist system that sanctions violence against people in prison. The problem is that in our prisons, onlookers can't document the abuses using their cell phones. We believe, and this is a value held by the honorees whose contributions we're recognizing today, that a key strategy for addressing these crises is to expose what is happening in our prisons beyond the public eye by bringing community members inside to see firsthand. This is a value that goes back to the founders of the Correctional Association. Members of our board have described our authority under state law as our sacred trust. And particularly now, this work does feel sacred as the nation grapples with our society's shameful inequalities, made even more visible by the pandemic and state violence. That's why we're honoring 24 members of our board today. Thank you to those of you who've made a contribution in recognition of this group of extraordinary people. If you've not yet had the opportunity to donate, you can do so by going to our website, correctionalassociation.org/donate. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to spending time with you all today.
Thanks for those words of introduction, Jennifer. I think that, we're now at the opportunity to begin to dive a little deeper to explore the work of the Correctional Association. And I understand, Jennifer, that you had an opportunity to interview some of the key thought leaders in the field. And soon everyone on this call is going to be able to benefit from some clips from those interviews. But before we go to the video, as they say, can you share with the group some of your own reflections about what you learned from those interviews?
Yes. So in keeping with our theme, standing on the shoulders of giants, I spoke with 4 giants in the world of social justice and public service: Bob Penoyer, Michelle Deitch, Carlton Mitchell, and Katrina Vanden Heuvel, who of course is one of our distinguished honorees today. I first asked each guest to talk about the environment in which the Correctional Association works and the need for change, and their responses were so expansive and thoughtful. Let's listen to what they had to say.
You've got people who are held in a closed environment with people who have total control over their lives. Bad things can happen in those kinds of settings. And we need to know what's happening inside, to bring an outside set of eyes into that environment, to question why things are happening the way they are, to be a vehicle for people who are incarcerated to share their concerns or their complaints. And it also lets everybody know that someone is watching. It acts as a form of informal social control over the behavior of the people who work in these environments. So oversight really supports a much healthier and safer environment for everyone who lives and works in those settings.
I think we're at a pivotal point in this country's history when it comes to understanding the failure of how mass incarceration has defined the criminal justice world. And I think not just a younger generation, but the discourse itself understands that we need to privilege or to amplify reform, not punitive measures, that those inside come back, and that we need education, we need humanity, we need job training. We need, on a broader scale, a better understanding of decarceration, of rethinking what prisons are about. And this coronavirus moment has shown us the cruelty of the divisions in a country, and that prisons and jails need to be rethought as places of structural inequality, structural racism, of structural misogyny. And a younger generation and others also understand the importance of electing, of finding reform-minded prosecutors, of sheriffs, of those who work in the criminal justice system. So there are many ways that the CA, I would say, has been an early alert warning system that has shaped some of what we see today, redefining the criminal justice space.
While I was at the CA, I met a gentleman who had served a long term in prison and had been denied parole for a period of time that far exceeded his initial sentence. and that was Fareed. And Fareed, for me, was an individual who served his time based on the crime that he had committed, but also took that time to invest in himself, and what I would consider to be a true model of someone who has been rehabilitated. People are sent to prison for two reasons. One is for punishment, and the other is for rehabilitation. Well, the sentencing judge pretty much takes care of the punishment side of it by sentencing the individual. Well, what about the rehabilitation part? You know, some of that responsibility does fall on the institution, the correctional institution. But how do you define whether a person is rehabilitated or not? And what is rehabilitation? This country is, the emphasis is more on punishment than it is on rehabilitation.
In the words of the escaped slave Harriet Tubman, who worked with the Underground Railroad, who before the Civil War, at great personal risk, saved over 100 slaves. Quote, "If you hear the dogs barking, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If you hear the voices chasing you, keep going. Never stop. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going."
Well, those were some powerful and meaningful words, and ending those videos with the phrase "keep going," I hope inspires all of us to support the work of the Correctional Association. I now have the privilege to introduce one of the Correctional Association's most esteemed board members. He is also the Chief of Staff at the Bronx Defenders, and that is Wes Keynes. Wes, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. I know we're all looking forward to learning more about our honorees, and you have the privilege of giving us that information. So I'll turn it over to you, Wes.
Thank you, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here today with you all. Our honorees represent an amazing group of people who each came to the CA for their own very personal reasons, and were driven by these personal reasons to really contribute their excellence and their expertise to the work of the Correctional Association. I personally came to the Correctional Association almost 3 decades ago, ironically, not as a board member, but as a very ignorant young person who was unaware of who the Correctional Association was, what they did, what their mandates are. And I was incarcerated in New York State Correctional Facility back in 1990, sentenced to 25 years to life. And I literally thought that I was tossed out and discarded by our society. And it was the Correctional Association who allowed me to see that people like our honorees existed out in society who cared profoundly about both the conditions and the growth of the men and women in New York State who are incarcerated. Some of our honorees have come to this work, you know, speaking to their personal experiences of having family members who, you know, had been incarcerated and given birth while incarcerated, and what that had meant for themselves and for their family. Others, you know, were criminal defense attorneys who had seen clients go into this system that was filled with darkness and wanted to both understand what happens within that darkness and to bring light to that darkness. Our honorees are extraordinary people, and we honor them today with profound gratitude for the work that they have done and will no doubt continue to do in this space long after they have left this board. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Wes, for providing not only those insights about our incredible honorees, but also for sharing your journey and the importance of the Correctional Association to you personally. And it's a really good segue into Jennifer's next set of remarks, which are really about the impact of the organization and the important work it does. Jennifer, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Right. Well, an organization that has existed since 1844 has, of course, had a lot of impact on the world around it. And of course, the world has transformed since our founding. But when I spoke with our featured guests in advance about their reflections and insights on our work, they had a lot to say, and unfortunately we had to trim a lot of the wonderful things that they said about the Correctional Association out so that we could fit into a 1 hour Zoom. But here's what they had to say about this organization's impact just in the last couple of decades.
In those places where oversight, it's been very effective at shining a light on conditions of confinement, on saying, why do you do things this way? And causing the people who lead those facilities to maybe change some of those practices. It has led to more opportunities for people to get out of solitary confinement settings. It's given people more opportunities to get recreation and programs and services. It's caused changes in policies and practices. It's changed the food that's offered to people. Pretty much in every way, shape, and form, oversight allows for questioning of what's happening inside, and are there ways that it can be improved?
Well, in this country, if in this society where we have put a great deal more emphasis on punishment than we have on rehabilitation, that day will come when we will have to own up to our failure and our successes. The day that, and this may be the day that we're facing now, this may be the time of reckoning for our society as a whole because of the things that we've either not done right, for the things that we have not been successful at. And we truly have not been successful at rehabilitating. We've been very successful at punishment. And pressure has to be placed on the system and done through independent oversight. And that is the effective, necessary work that the Correctional Association does.
A body observed is a body that acts differently. So exposing, monitoring, reporting is something the CA has this unique capacity to do. I think for journalism, we know the impediments. When you have an institution, a prison, it's very difficult to get in for transparency and accountability. But it is the fuel that will play more and more of a role in driving the idea of decarceration, and it already has. But again, I think the CA's impact is not only because of dedicated, passionate people involved with it on the board or you or others who work for it, but because of its unique role, which it has used well and must continue to use in creative, innovative, and persistent ways.
To me, what you do, you and others like you who serve the community in the way you're doing, are the soul of America. I tear up with gratitude.
Well, I hope you all share with me the moving words of our honorees and how powerful those statements are and how they can help move us all forward. And part of the team moving the Correctional Association forward is Martha King, a talented board member of the association, a dear friend of mine, and the former executive director of the New York City Board of Correction. Martha, it's my greatest honor and thrill to now turn it over to you to share some of your reflections on what the honorees have shared with us.
Thanks, Melissa. It's great to be here with all of you today. I came to know CANY in 2001 while I was attending its coalition meetings back in the old office on 15th Street. And it's just been a tremendous honor for me to join CANY's board 19 years later to support the organization through our new strategic plan that centers decarceration and that centers fundamental transformation in our criminal legal system. It's a bittersweet leadership transition and celebration today, but I'm so happy to be a part of it. I came to the CANY board from my experience monitoring New York City's jails at the New York City Board of Correction. And even with that behind me, I was shocked at the lack of transparency and accountability in our state's prisons, the utter isolation and harshness of those conditions, and the routine civil and human rights violations that take place there in our state prisons. That being said, CANY is the only independent organization going into every part of every prison on a regular basis, talking to incarcerated people and to staff, and outside of prison, talking to their loved ones. With our small but mighty staff and board, we make 10 monitoring visits each year. We interview 3,000 incarcerated people each year, and we review responses from 5,000 people, survey responses from 5,000 people each year. In this time of way overdue change, I'm very hopeful that we will have more allies in this, that we desperately need in this really critical and unique work that CANY does to hold the state fully accountable for transforming conditions and drastically shrinking the size of our prisons. Few people know CANY's impact as well as the 24 board members that we are honoring today. I would first like to highlight Michael Mushlin's service not only to CANY, but to the national field of prison oversight, of which he's impacted greatly. And I'd like to quote him and this very truthful comment that he made. "The fight to bring public attention to the problems plaguing our prisons is never ending and critical. I believe the most forgotten of all people are prisoners. We must never forget or abandon anyone in prison. I believe that the CA's long struggle against mass incarceration and the fight to end solitary confinement, not to mention the struggle to finally end shackling women prisoners at childbirth, are critical achievements during my tenure on the board." And I'd like to quote Jim Silbert, who I've had the great privilege of learning from while touring Attica and Auburn and Five Points. Jim said, "During my tenure as chair of the board, I believe the most significant accomplishment of the organization was to restore the CA's ability to visit and monitor the conditions of confinement in the New York State prisons after they were unilaterally curtailed by docs. This curtailment struck the very essence of the CA's purpose and authority. Faced with no other choice, the CA commenced and prosecuted a lawsuit in federal court, which resulted in regulations reaffirming our legislative authority to visit and monitor all aspects of all New York State prisons and the resumption of our visits." And to close, I'd like to quote the Honorable Felice Shea, who has been a steadfast shepherd for CANY for 20 years. And she noted CANY's impact in the passage of New York State's anti-shackling legislation and raise the age legislation. She said that her proudest moments on the board included, and I quote, "drawing the attention of the public and lawmakers to the extent and evils of mass incarceration, of solitary confinement, and of the lack of adequate medical care and mental health care for prisoners." Thank you.
Martha, thanks so much for those words and for distilling some of the powerful accomplishments of our honorees today. It's time to move into the segment of our program that's about gratitude. And I think particularly within the context of the world in which we live, gratitude is even more important. So I'm glad we're all still together to take the time to express our gratitude for the giants upon whose shoulders we stand as we continue to fight for criminal justice reform and change. I will now turn it over to Jennifer again to bring us into the final video segment. Jennifer?
Thanks, Melissa. Yes, each of our guests expressed their gratitude, as Bob Penoyer did so beautifully earlier in the program. He called members of our board extraordinary citizens who care about their community. The contributions of this board as a whole and as individuals came up throughout the conversations. And we've got a short segment now of some other remarks from the guests.
I was deeply honored to receive the 1844 medal, to receive it along with my father, who preceded me on the board. In telling me about the board, it moved me as someone, again, I had been at the Nation for many years, where we have a long-time radical commitment to radical reform of the prison system. But to receive it with him was very important, because his work as chair of the Board of Corrections under John Lindsay from 1970 to 73, in my mind, really revealed what could be done when you had someone and a team working with him to expose the suicides, to use the media effectively to expose and to propose and to hold accountable a system that, if not observed, and the CA does that so well, is a very dangerous one, not only for those inside, but for the society as a whole, because it needs exposure, it needs accountability, it needs transparency. So all power to your work and to your mandate.
I think that the members of this board deserve tremendous credit for the work that they have done over such a long period of time. Their long-term commitment to this board is absolutely stellar and inspiring. And what they have accomplished through their work is that they have managed to show the community values to the agency that they are providing oversight for. They come in and say, this is what is important to us as members of the community. And it changes the picture. The agency then sees itself through another's eyes. And I think that they have brought in such a wonderful perspective, a humanistic perspective that is invaluable. So from the bottom of my heart, let me express my gratitude for the work that they've done, and say that that's really a model for the rest of the country.
I want to thank the board because they helped me to think about those dark places within prison life and the prison system. Those dark places where people have to become rehabilitated and to overcome that darkness. And those that can overcome it are extremely remarkable people, and they do exist. And I thank the board for enlightening me, for sensitizing me, and also for their caring and compassion about the people who are incarcerated, that they would give their time, their talents, their treasures, their energy for the issues that we have to face on a daily basis. And I thank Jennifer for giving me this opportunity to pay tribute to so many people who have had such an impact on my life, on my career, and on my becoming a better person. Thank you.
Those were some powerful statements from a remarkable group of people who really had a monumental impact in a very important space. And I know everyone on this call joins me in saying many, many thanks. I'm going to turn now to the Reverend Steve Phelps, who is a current board member of the Correctional Association and indeed the vice chair of the board. Steve?
Indeed they do. Thank you, Melissa. Those of us who are newer to the board have virtually inherited from our honorees what amounts to the DNA of their respect and their effective encouragements of one another and of CA staff. During the intensive search for executive director, which culminated in the offer that we made to Jennifer Scaife, my gratitude for these board members grew by leagues as they deployed insights and wide professional connections and emotional intelligence to set the course for CANY's coming leadership. I'd like to share from a handful of the board members we're honoring today a single sentence summary that they offered in regard of their fellow board members. Barbara Berg spoke of the board members' impressive dedication and commitment to the goals of the CA, the generosity of time offered of tireless efforts on behalf of the incarcerated. Barry Bloom shared that the board members he knew were always supportive of the important goals of the organization and ready to help. And Bill Dean's comment came from a little bit different angle, as he noted that the board showed, quote, loyalty to a cause where progress comes very slowly, unquote. This last quality wants some special emphasis. Martin Luther King's stirring paraphrase of Reverend Theodore Parker's idea that the arc of the moral universe is long, well, that comment is first of all a warning that all of us in social justice movements and that our honored board members really took to heart. The warning is might be thought of like this. When the goal is to move a troubled society onto a firm foundation, a moral foundation, no one lives to see the promised land. To the contrary, everyone carries in their heart another of MLK's famous words, I may not get there with you, but I have seen the promised land. Those we honor today have seen the vision of a great moral arc bent earthward. Not touching the earth, God knows the rainbow arc isn't down yet, but bent earthward, the glory of justice done. And they knew, even as they passed lights to the next generation, that their work would not be accomplished on their watch. Now, for a while, we, staff and board for the CA, are the ones who must keep on talking, keep on walking, as the old spiritual has it, often in obscurity, walk into the freedom land with their lights in hand. Our gratitude rises to the heights for all who are being honored today. Thank you.
So looking ahead into the future, we are forging ahead with a stronger sense of urgency than ever, and we're really excited about the future. In the coming years, we are committed to expanding our access to prisons in New York through a variety of strategies, with the goal of fundamentally shifting the way that prisons are operated. Yesterday, the Daily News published an op-ed by my colleagues, Terrell Muhammad, Herbert Morales, and Phil Miller, calling upon the legislature to pass a prison oversight bill, which would strengthen our authority and protect independent oversight. The bill would make it more difficult for government agencies to constrain us as we go inside of prisons to see what's really going on. This bill is currently pending, and it's directly related to the demands for police accountability that we've heard grow louder and louder over the past few weeks. In the coming years, we'll also focus on further strengthening our partnerships with oversight organizations, both here in New York and in other states, to call attention to the essential role that oversight plays in reform, and to remind the public that state corrections agencies are accountable to us as taxpayers. We'll also strengthen our partnerships with family members of incarcerated people who contributed just recently so powerfully to our COVID-19 report. and will continue to relentlessly communicate the harms of incarceration and the urgent need to reduce the number of people in prison, because shrinking the size and the scope of our criminal justice system is the only hope for improving conditions in prisons and jails. Our research team, Evan Mishula, Austin Lucandi, and most recently, we've been joined by Felicia Henry, are harnessing the power of data and firsthand accounts from people in prison to advance these essential goals. And finally, as we thank our 24 outgoing board members, we're bringing new directors into the organization to carry the mantle and help further empower this historic organization during this historic moment. I'm personally grateful to our honorees for supporting me in leading this organization during a uniquely challenging time, which feels full of opportunity in spite of the anguish that so many of us are experiencing. And I'm grateful to the people attending this event remotely for your support and your belief in our mission to promote transparency and accountability, to protect the rights of incarcerated people, and to support our efforts and the efforts of so many other organizations to reduce the number of people incarcerated in our prisons. We cannot do it without your support, and I'm grateful to all of you.
Thanks so much for those reflections, Jennifer, and for sharing the important work that's ahead. You know, oversight is more essential now than ever. And there's certainly a great deal of work to be done, as Jennifer said. And she's right. We can't do it without everybody's support. And I count this close circle of friends, family, and honorees on this call today as part of the engine that's going to keep us moving ahead into battle and reform. And so with that, I'd like to announce that Martha King and I have pooled our resources and are proud to pledge a match for anyone's donations on this call up to $2,000. And I hope that everyone will give. You'll be seeing a how to donate link, and you can also do so through the Correctional Association website. And as we close the program now, I would like to invite all of our honorees to appear on screen so we can see your beautiful faces and the power of your work, eye to eye. And let's all come together united in the continued victory we're having as we make the world a better place and the world we wish to see and be a part of. So let's see some faces united together for victory. And I thank everyone for attending today.
Agreed. Be well. Take care, Peter. See the swords. Salute you.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, John. Be well.